Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or maybe even good night. You might be watching this just before you go to bed. Your daily dose of narcissism. It's me, Nisanka, from Coaching with Nisanka, and help parents who co-parent with narcissistic partners or ex-partners. And I'm going to let Amanda, my amazing colleague, amazing colleague who does wonderful work, to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Amanda Hale, and I help predominantly women navigate breakup and divorce from someone highly toxic or narcissistic. And I also help with the co-parenting aspect as well.
I know it's really important because it's impossible to co-parent.
Yeah.
We tend to parallel parent, although the legal term might be co-parenting. Today's topic is really interesting. It is one thing that keeps coming up in the patterns of behavior of narcissistic abuse survivors and tend to develop in children as well of narcissistic parents. So let's talk about trauma bonding. Before we talk about the topic today, it's important that we highlight nothing we discuss this in chat, in this conversation, in this channel, a substitute to any legal or medical advice or intervention. So the responsibility is yours to seek legal or medical help. And second is, neither Amanda nor I are clinical psychologists or psychiatrists. We're not licensed therapists. I am a life coach. I use NLP and holistic approaches like EFT and Matrix to support my clients. And Amanda as well is a trained high conflict divorce coach as well. So we both got special training to deal with this subject away from the clinical training. So the information we share come from research we do. So one of the books that I have been reading is The Body Keeps the Score, Basil van der Kolk. And I, obviously being a holistic practitioner, I go into holistic aspects as well. So this is another book, Peter A. Levine, Gabor Mate. These are our usual source of information, so reliable places to go to. So that's, I just wanted to declare first. So going into trauma bond, Amanda, why don't we start with some personal stories of what this trauma bond looks like in our relationships? How does it actually manifest in our relationships?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is it kind of manifests like this intense addiction, essentially. I can't say personally what it's like to be addicted to a drug, but it's like this intense feeling where you can't stop yourself from going back to this person. You're always thinking about them. You're ruminating, essentially. These thoughts are going around and around in one's head. And you may feel physical manifestations, heart beating faster. You could have headaches, all sorts of things that can manifest. So how would you describe it?
It's just basically, it is an addiction. I think addiction as we know it in the society usually refers to alcohol addiction, porn addiction, drug addiction, and all sorts of addiction. Addiction is actually anything, according to Gabor Mate, addiction is anything that we do to soothe a pain. It is a solution to a problem. So in trauma bonding, addiction feels like we just cannot stay away from this person who tends to abuse us constantly. We feel so attached to this person. This person becomes the source of protection, love, admiration, and we tend to idealize these people. And it's just that feeling, I cannot live without you. I'll die if you die. That kind of feeling. But what actually happens in the relationship constantly is verbal abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse. and some financial abuse in most cases, and sometimes physical and sexual abuse as well. So all types of sort of levels of addiction goes round, while we idealize this person to be our source of love, attention, protection, and it's just we cannot separate ourselves from it. So something I've got like um bit of a definition. So trauma bonding is defined as the misuse of fear, excitement, sexual feelings, and sexual physiology to entangle another person. So you can see in a romantic relationship this being played out. If you think about the love bombing phase, where like you're really attracted to this person, and everything feels like firework and everything moves really fast and sex is great, what happens in the brain is these neural networks are being created, and there's this reward system in operation constantly, the dopamine, high level of dopamine pumping in our brain, and we get addicted to that feeling. And and then what happens through that process of addiction is that in that phase, we start to trust this person, and then we get attracted and we idealize this person, right? And then what happens next in a trauma bonded relationship is, and soon the invalidation begins. So the abusive behavior begins. So there's the insult here, there's the joke with the barbed wires, right, attached to it. And there's that, you're crazy, and then you're trying to talk about your emotional needs, and then you're being labeled as the crazy person. And then the gaslighting begins because you are so living in that high attracted kind of high intense moment. Still the dopamine is still high, our mind is so mind and body are so confused. What's going on, right? So the abusive behavior goes on. We're so confused. And then what they do is, then there's the apology, the attention, a period of silence that nothing actually happens. So you're like, oh, you know what? I had one of those bad moments. It must be me. Maybe I've done something wrong. Actually, I'm going to change myself so it won't happen next time. So you kind of abandon your needs and abandon yourself, right? And then the power increases. With that happens when you abandon yourself in any situation, the power balance changes, the power increases, the abuse begins again, and it just goes on and on and on and on. Every time you abandon yourself, the trauma bonds get stronger and the neural networks get stronger, and you get more confused, and the power increases. In terms of the power of the abuser increases, and then you end up becoming powerless. It's just basically the trauma bond, sort of explained in a cycle. And it's so hard to see it, and I can tell from a personal experience, it is so hard to see this happening because it happens fast. It also happens over a period at a time as well, like one drop at a time, one droplet at a time. And you can constantly abandon yourself means that you lose yourself in this whole process. So by the time you start something, like by the time you start sort of stopping and questioning, something is not right, I don't know what's going on, you've already been gaslighted to think that something is wrong with you. So you live in that reality, that narrative that the problem is you. So it's so hard to break the trauma bond. And this sometimes can happen in an adulthood, and this usually starts at a very young age in our childhood. These patterns start at a very young age. um Amanda, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, well,
Any questions you might have?
well, I thought you described it really so well, and you're leading into something important, which is often why we get into a trauma bonded relationship later on in life is because we've experienced that kind of trauma bonded relationship early on in childhood. And so maybe, you know, if there's, especially if there's a narcissistic parent, and so you learn that your idea of love is that there's some kind of abusive behavior attached in some ways. So there's that element of familiarity in the future relationship. So it seems, well, I've seen this before. And there is the idea of this term, repetition compulsion. So, yeah, so you feel like, well, this time around, I'm going to be able to do things differently. So it's not on a conscious level, but you enter these relationships thinking, well, you know, not consciously, but on some level, you're thinking, this time around, I'm going to have the solution and it's going to work out differently. But unfortunately, until you really do the work on yourself and you figure out your childhood wounding and all that, you're just going to repeat.
Absolutely. The thing is, trauma bonded cycle is just, it's and we're talking about it, but it doesn't stand on its own either. And there's so many other things that's attached to it. Our fight or flight response, our fawn response, especially our fawn response, you know. So when we experience negative experiences, when our body goes into this trauma response, there's 4 responses in the sympathetic nervous system. One is the fight response, one is the flight response, the other one is freeze response. And one thing that I've actually become very recently aware of, this one, that is the fawn response. Fawn response is very common amongst children who grew up with narcissistic parents, because basically what fawn response is in order to appease the adult in that relationship, in order not to be in trouble. And how grief striking is that concept that a child has to act in a way that would appease an adult so that they wouldn't get into trouble. And that's just so sad. And so fawn response is that, and we all tend to have these fawn responses within ourselves. And you know, you might recognize this within you. So you know, you might say yes to somebody, but just within your body, you're like, this is a no, this is a no. And then you're kind of internalizing that shame and anger towards you, especially as an adult, when you keep saying no to yourself and you're saying yes to others. And that's a fawn response, because you're worried subconsciously about saying no to somebody for the fear of being in trouble. And unfortunately, in toxic workplaces, in toxic relationships, even in school systems, right, where there's high emphasis on authority and control, you can see children adapting into this fawn response a lot. So you will see in amongst children, the children you see as sometimes good behavior or very compliant children who are very silent, who obey the rules, are likely that they are in the fawn response, because they don't want. Survival is a big thing for children. They will do anything to survive. They can't fight the adults. They can't fly away from home from the adults, right? So what they do is they tend to please the adults. And I mean, I often hear sometimes teachers even and some adults say, you can't say no to an adult. Of course you can encourage children to say no to an adult. When you say things like you can't say no to an adult, what you're doing is you're encouraging that fawn response in children that actually goes on to them becoming trauma bonded later in their life. And this trauma bond is common in dynamics like parent-child, romantic partners, of course, and I think prison officers and inmates. So the captivators and the captive. I think a good example is the 365 days movie, 50 Shades of Grey movie. These are really good examples of trauma bonded relationships. I have to say, before I became aware of trauma bond, I thought 50 Shades was an awesome movie. I thought it was a love story. I thought it was a love story, and I'm not really paying attention to the BDM aspect of it, BDSM aspect of it. I'm just saying the dynamic, the power dynamic that that is involved there. So really pay attention to how much you're saying yes to when your body is actually saying no, because it just can really lead into you becoming unwell later in life, which is another discussion we're going to have at some point, how we become unwell when we say no to ourselves.
It's it's just so hard because there is that physiological component to it, and
Yeah.
the cocktail of chemicals that are produced,
Yes.
the highs and the lows with the intermittent reinforcement. So as you
Yeah.
would add into the dopamine, there's the oxytocin.
Research done by Dr. Ramani, and I really like her work, especially with the narcissism. I think she's such a warrior. I have so much adoration and respect for her, for the work that she does and the knowledge she shares. So here's some. So one is that we justify abusive behavior. Right. So I think this is one of the biggest things. We just justify he's having a bad day. She's stressed at work these days. You know, there's so much work to do. Or they've just lost their job. These are all very stressful situations. And absolutely, we empathize. And we've got to be very careful extending this empathy in situations like that. Empathy without discernment is actually recipe for disaster. So you can have understanding and empathy for somebody, but at the same time draw boundaries to protect yourself and not justify the behavior, right? Now, when we tend to empathize, we love somebody, we tend to empathize with somebody, we just allow these boundaries to be diluted, like melt away, because it's like we justify them. But no, you've got to pay attention. It's okay that you're there for their stress, that's fine. But you can actually absolutely adore boundaries, say, I understand your stress. I understand your stress. You're shouting at me. I don't want this shouting right now. When you're calmer, I'll come back and talk to you, right? Because there is absolutely no way, especially with an adult. Children, you co-regulate with them, but for adults it is their responsibility to regulate themselves and not to lash out on somebody else. And it's absolutely no, there's nothing on this planet that we can say it's acceptable to for somebody else to lash out on you and beat you and do all sorts of horrible things, right? So stop justifying, acknowledge abuse for what it is. The second one is believing future faking. Oh my goodness, this is a big part that I had to, it was so hard personally for me to break this part. Believing in future faking, when you've been told this beautiful fairy tale is told and spread in front of you. When this happens, I'll do this for you. When that happens, I'll do this for you. When you finish your masters, we'll do this. We'll have a baby one day. We'll do this. But none of that happens because we are so attached to a story, a fairy tale that's laid in front of us, and we forget actually here and now it's not happening. If you can just pay attention to here and now and just say, it doesn't seem to be happening right now. And it's been this has been, I've been hearing this for the last 5 years and it's still not happened. Well, it's time. But you will find if you're in these situations, it takes a lot more effort to then go, actually, you know what? It's not happening. This is not what I want. I'm going to walk away. That's a hard decision, right? It's not easy. And so stop believing that future faking, because the narcissistic people are very aware of your weaknesses, likes, dislikes, your dreams, goals. They're very good at hooking you up with with these fairy tales, they will fabricate a beautiful story to match your dreams so that they can hook you up with this whole future faking. So pay attention. It's not happened here and now, then it's not happened at all, and it's unlikely to happen. Actually, in fact, it will never happen. So remember that. And the other thing is recycling fights. Constantly you're arguing about the same thing. This is not about who washes the dishes kind of things. This is more about somebody withholding sex. They want to withholding sex to control the other person. Somebody, your emotional needs not being met. You being the person who's sacrificing your goals and dreams every single time to appease the narcissistic person and then you're having these conversations over and over and over and over again, and they'll corner you with, it is for us, it is for the family, and come up with all these things, fabricated theories. But if you ever try to apply the same theory that they bring up to them and try to hold them accountable, you will see them attacking you. So pay attention to these repeated cycles. And then magical, mystical thinking about the abusive partner. Again, I'm going to bring 50 Shades of Grey into this picture. This magical, beautiful, one day it's going to come in on a horse and just, take me up. And then I'm the princess in the dream. I'm saying this because I've thought about this. Like I'm sharing it because there's no shame in admitting it. Unless we admit and accept that these things are happening within us and we become friends with these parts, the split parts of us, we can't break the cycle. So, I've definitely thought about these mystical things, especially at an early stage of dating, if they've said something and, like if you're the kind of person who's already married and have children with this person you barely know, pay attention to those patterns, right? And the other thing is fear of them leaving. And they will threaten you with that as well. It's like, if you don't do this, I'll leave you, and parents do that as well. If you're not coming with me, I'm going to leave you. I'm going to shut the door and I'm going to do this. I'm going to take your toys away, So pay attention to these things, fear of leaving. And then any kind of threaten that you do to children actually nurture trauma bonding within them. So be careful, be mindful. Becoming a one shop for your partner. You're the cook, you're the banker, you're the accountant, you're the driver, you're the chauffeur, you're the lover, you're everything. And you try to be in these roles forever, wasting your energy, wasting your time, wasting your career, thinking that one day they will notice you doing this all. But they don't. It's good for them because it serves them. And they want a convenient life and they will do that. They'll take it, but they'll never see you for who you are. So pay attention. And then also hiding your feelings and needs from them. I think it's really important to pay attention to the difference between expressing your feelings and needs and asking permission. And until I've actually heard this, I didn't realize. A while ago I heard this conversation, and until I didn't realize this is what I was doing. Because I always used to, as a person, I say, oh, can I please, like do this? I'm so sorry. I know I'm ruining your weekend, but I really need to do this. But do you mind? Well, that's actually asking permission. And I thought I was being very nice. But actually asking permission, there's a power imbalance. You feel obliged to somebody. Whereas asking for a need or expressing a need is a lot more assertive, a lot more direct. It's more like, oh, I have this work event over the weekend. I really want to do that. Do you mind doing this for me? And it's very different, and it comes from a very equal power place. It's not, it's not like you're less powerful than the other person, and you're hiding, you're rationalizing your relationship to the other people. And this is so common. Like, I know of people who've told me just before they got married that they really didn't want to go through the marriage, but they did anyway because the cards were sent out, the church was booked, and they already had everything sorted, and then years later They were like, oh, I should have listened to myself. But then they carry on making their story. And, like I remember booking holidays and, it was all effort after effort. And then there's this beautiful picture in my head, like it's all happening. But actually, there's no equality there. There's no much, mutual investment there. So you're hiding, you're rationalizing what's happening in your relationship with other people. So pay attention to these ones. And if you are experiencing any of them, it's likely that you're in a trauma bonded relationship. So it's very important to pay. I think I kept repeating, pay attention and pay attention and pay attention. Amanda?
You're going to hear a little bit of yapping in the background. Apologies. So, but I think you went through the steps so well, and you described them each incredibly well. I think that I was just going to add that there, even if one is now out of the relationship, there's often still that trauma bond, and it, it takes time. And I was saying before to Nisanga that often that kind of addictive element of the relationship can manifest in different ways. So it could be that suddenly you want to get the equivalent of a PhD in narcissism. So you're watching millions of videos on YouTube and you're reading every single book that you can get your hands on. So it's just kind of the same type of thing, but you've changed the focus. So
yeah. Oh, absolutely. And the addictions, because there's a withdrawal when that pattern doesn't exist anymore. It's not happening anymore. That reward system, there's going to be a withdrawal. It's a chemical withdrawal. Unfortunately, there's a physiological aspect to it. It's a chemical withdrawal. So don't blame yourself. And none of these are aimed at blaming you. It's about raising awareness to what's happening within you, so that you can learn what's happening within you. So when there's that chemical withdrawal, we tend to fill this with something else. It could be dating, and it could be alcohol, it could be something else. It could be something that actually feels good, like therapy, but therapy in itself can be an addictive factor. We sometimes people go into therapy so that we can be better, excel at something, and that's just a replacement to the pattern that we've experienced. So pay attention, always question, be curious about what the intention of what you're doing. Does it come from a place of joy? Does it come from a place of calm? Does it come from a place of, are you being mindful of what you're doing? Those are the things that you need to pay attention. And like Amanda said, we will continue to fill that gap with different things. And when you don't, you feel that withdrawal so bad. Why am I feeling this way? I'm just so sad. I'm grieving. I'm ruminating. I want to do something, and then you have this reckless feeling within you that you might notice that you just don't want to shut down. You want to either watch TV, work, and become a workaholic, or go and do some sort of risky gains or something. There's that recklessness within us. It's not our internal system. It's just split into so many sort of parts of us that we've abandoned in the process, that they're all kind of competing and they're all existing and we are not aware of it. So become aware of those parts and accept them. That's the important thing. Accept them, that they exist.
And they're all their coping mechanisms, so they have a purpose in the moment.
Yeah.
The important thing is that if you try and remove one of these coping mechanisms, because maybe it's not a healthy one, you have to have something to replace it with. Hopefully something a little more healthy.
Yeah.
And I was going to say something else, but it slipped my mind. Please, sorry, go ahead. I'm just going to think what it was.
Okay. No worries. So I think we've talked about what trauma bond is. We talked about like signs that you might be in trauma bond. So how to break trauma bond is to first, really important, acknowledge abuse for what it is. It's not that somebody else is having a bad day. It's somebody else taking their bad day out on you. And that's the difference. People can have bad days, right? You can support, you can empathize, but you can't let them take it out on you. That's where you draw the boundary. So accept and acknowledge for what it is, and then pay attention to what your body is telling you. So your body will tell you, there's an internal guidance system, that intuition is telling you, this is not right, this is not right, this is not right. Listen to it because it isn't right. And then work on yourself. Go to these places, these parts of us that we've abandoned as children, in order to survive, as adults in order to survive, and just welcome them all, integrate them all. And healing is all about us becoming aware and doing this work. And it's not linear. It's not something that you can go, okay, well, 6 sessions I'm going to be healed. Nothing is. But within 6 sessions you become aware of patterns that you might not have been aware of before, and you might be able to change some of your behavioral patterns accordingly. And maybe you take that knowledge away and then you apply it somewhere else. And that's what healing is all about. This is not invitation that you invest a lifetime investment with a therapist or a coach. It is about you understanding where also how you make better decisions about yourself when you invest time and money into somebody. Pay attention. And I think Amanda and I both agree that unfortunately therapy as well as coaching industry have become a bit of a racket, in the sense that we acknowledge that these things exist, but we also, I'm not a part of it, and I try not to be. But there's sometimes the message out there is, you're broken, you're this, you're that. There's a limiting belief, and then you need to break limiting beliefs and become aware of these language. Don't let anybody else coerce you into buying anything. Just make sure it is your choice, your decision, you have thought through. And it is with either of us as well. Make sure that you give consent, that it comes from you because you have made that choice to do the work. So these are really important parts, especially if you're in a trauma bonded relationship and you're in that phase where you're trying to replace it with something else. Become aware when you put the money in somewhere. Yeah. I think we've just gone really deep into it, and we can go a lot deeper into it from a spiritual point. It's one of the things I'd say as a leaving note. I think we might have to wrap it up in a minute. One of the things I'd say as a leaving point is that when you are abused as children, when you face sort of abuse in early childhood or trauma in early childhood, trauma isn't necessarily the event, it is how you feel and the belief that you create about yourself. That's what the trauma is all about, right? And they live within your body as well. And when these things happen, our energy is blocked, our development is blocked, our abundance, our natural flow is blocked. So we need to be able to unblock these things and allow a natural flow, that fluidity, like become like water. And then that way we can create the life that we want. I think that's all I want to say. So I'm going to share a couple of healing practices, if that's okay with you, Amanda. Shall I? I'm just going to refer to something. So some of the healing practices are like, you really do reconnect with your body. It's just so important, that because what happens when trauma happens is we disconnect with our own bodies. We tend to live in our mind a lot, but it's also very distorted and disconnected. So try and do disconnect with your body. So work with that, and then do some physical activities that's very helpful, like aerobics and yoga and dance and running. Gentle dancing is just so important, rhythmical dancing. And massage is really important because you helps you reconnect with the body. And if you are a survivor of, I don't know, sexual abuse, that might be tricky for you. So make sure it works for you first. Grounding activities, again, it's all about reclaiming your right to be here. When this trauma happens, our right to be here is challenged. And then in that challenge, we create these coping personalities within us. And that's what narcissistic people prey on later. By the way, narcissism in itself is a coping mechanism, right? So have an understanding of it, but be discerning of the empathy that you extend. That's all I can say today, I think. It's a long, long, long discussion.
Yeah, it's I mean, we could go into the practical side of things as well, you know, dealing with that trauma bond. But I think that would probably go on too long for today. But
Yeah, I'd say that'd be a different, maybe part two of this
yeah,
conversation. So we'll come back with
yeah.
another one. And anything you'd like to add, Amanda?
I'm just thinking in terms of you know, what helped me, and in terms of what you just said, healing modalities, and I tried many different things, but acupuncture can be a really good one.
Yeah,
Someone who has more of a if you're into that kind of thing, can be a bit woo-woo for some, but a spiritual healer who does acupuncture, for example, and opening up the chakras so you have that flow of energy. As you said, massage, for some that physical touch
yeah,
is so important.
yeah,
And there, I mean, there's so many things. TRE, the kind of shaking of the body,
yeah,
helps to essentially finish off the, or deal with the kind of trauma response to, like in nature, when you see the animal shaking themselves off, that
yeah,
finishes off the process. And unfortunately, as humans, we don't do it the way an animal would do. Otherwise, we wouldn't have trauma trapped in the body. But yeah, I'll end there because
yeah.
I think we've been on for quite a while.
Long time. Okay. Thank you very much, guys. I hope this has been helpful to you. And if you have any questions, drop us a DM or make a comment, and then we will get back.